our case, we have the above ground and the underground. The second is the corridor itself, which is made up of the track, the overhead catenary, the power stations, and the signals. And then the third is the control system, which is the brain that operates the entire system. And then lastly is the vehicles. So with respect to overall construction update of the stations, I can confirm that at the east, so from Blair to Ottawa U, things are nearing final occupancy. They're just into fit and final finishes, and they're actually looking at mobilizing cleaners to get everything polished up and finished up. With respect to the underground stations, Rideau continues to be the station that we're carefully monitoring. It has some work, some significant amount of construction work and mechanical, electrical still remaining to be done. So we're watching that. And then Parliament and Lyon are nearing completion, and RTG has, and we've seen the data, they've added resources to those stations and some additional oversight to ensure that they move forward. In the west, there's been good progress, particularly in the last month or so, with respect to those above-ground stations. So Pimsey, Bayview, and Tunney's, they're progressing well, and they also have a plan to undertake testing and commissioning concurrently in the remaining stations that have construction activities, both the above-ground and the underground. So very quickly, just some slides in the east end. These stations, as you can tell, are finished. All the elements are there. All the passenger-facing elements are also there. The exterior landscaping, if you drive by them, many of them are nearing completion. Saint Laurent, for example, you can see that's a good shot of all the finite detail that's necessary to get to that final occupancy. A reminder that fencing, the construction fencing on both sides of the platforms, that is temporary. That's required as you're doing the live testing. It separates the active corridor from the construction and maintenance workers. Tremblay Station, same thing, active testing going through that. You can see the finishes that are completed there. And same with Herdman. There's a significant landscape component with Herdman Station. Just if you see some missing panes of glass, that is intentional. Those are access ports. They keep those open to move equipment in and out and final materials. Lee's Station, same thing, and as I mentioned earlier on, you're going to start to see these get polished up from cleaning for opening. Ottawa, lots of work being done there, a lot of work on railings. As you can see, the temporary ones are being replaced by permanent fixtures. That machine on the left that's called Prep Tech, that prepares the surfaces for their final treatment. And then you can see the lighting that's on. Some people have asked, why is the lighting on during the day? It's part of the testing and commissioning of all the amenities within the station. With respect to the underground stations, I'm going to start off with Rideau. This shot is a shot of the Rideau station. It's massive, as you know. This is a temporary scaffolding system that's put in place. It does two things. It enables all the activities and the construction activities to continue concurrently as we want to start testing in the tunnel with trains. And the other thing it does is there's a short piece of catenary, so the overhead power distribution system to the trains, that is suspended from this scaffolding. But that gives you an indication of some of the work that's remaining to be done in the scope and scale of what's left to do in Rideau Station. Parliament, on the floor, those tiles are all done. That's protective plywood on there. Same with the columns. To the left, that is a large array of Lyon, same thing. Flooring is done. Those columns are complete. They just insert LED lightings where those slots are, and then as you can tell, they're doing the final ceiling panels. Elevators up and running. So Lyon is approaching that final completion piece. With respect to the west, you have Pimsey that is undergoing extensive landscaping. You've seen a lot of shots of those. People are tweeting out in terms of the scope and the scale and how it's set up for the future build around that great location. Same with Bayview, that landscaping that you see them working on, that was just last week. That's all been completed. And again, some of those open glass panels are for access for materials and final things that they need in the stations. Tunney's Pasture, you get to see the cameras there, some of the signage, the skylight that forms part of the artwork. And if you go by there in the evening times, you'll generally see two vehicles parked in that location. The next element is the corridor itself, and it contains the track that you see here, the overhead catenary, power stations. You see those distributed throughout the corridor, and signals. That has all been completed, so end-to-end, all of those elements are done. With respect to the Rideau piece, that just gets swapped out as part of the final finish once that scaffolding comes down. Next, in terms of the railroad build, is the communication-based train control system. And it's the system that controls the train. It is the brain of the entire system. It's highly sophisticated. It's been used around the world. It's by Thales. I've mentioned that to you before. And it's critical. It's like the human brain. It provides all the functionality to the railroad. The path to revenue service requires that we pay critical attention and focus on the commissioning of the CBTC and all the other systems, as they're vital to completion of the delivery of this program. It's hidden from view. I know the public can't see it, but it is essential to the safe, reliable operation of the system. And it's made up of the following components that all work together. There's the system and train controllers. So there's the overall system controllers, and then there's controllers within the individual trains. I'll show you a picture of that in a moment. There's what's called zone controllers. The network is broken into zones. And then there's the automatic train supervision, or ATS. That's what gets fed into the control system so that we can see the active movement of all trains, and we know where every train is all the time in operation and at what schedules. So this is the schematic. I've used this in the past. And it shows all those elements and how they connect together. What's important for everyone to understand in this piece is the computer system drives those trains. We have fully automated trains. We do have personnel in those cabs. That's for added security. That's for added functionality. And what gets loaded into this computer system is your schedules. So the morning rush hour schedule, the midday schedule, the evening schedule, special events, those are all preloaded into the system, and it drives the trains, and it tells them where to be at exact point throughout the corridor, and it has to be precise and accurate, and it keeps your schedule adherence, it keeps the trains safely spaced apart, it gives you the latitude in the future to increase your service levels, your headways, so the time between trains and so forth. So that computer system is doing a lot of things behind the scenes. It is proven technology, it is used around the world, and as you've probably heard about New York City and Toronto and some of the older systems, they're all converting to these systems. So they have older systems that doesn't give them the flexibility that we have. You're getting state-of-the-art. There's a 4-step process to commissioning a complex piece of systems that are like this. There's what's called system integration testing. Are all the parts talking to each other? There's system acceptance, so the vigorous acceptance protocols. It's standard engineering protocols, both from a computer perspective and a railroad operation perspective. And there's what are called safety cases. So you need to ensure that the trains can do everything that they're designed to do under various safety scenarios. And then there's trial operations. Now, the fourth element of the railroad is the trains, and that is what people see. They're critical. That's what carries our precious, most important commodity in this whole program. That's our customers. And, you know, we need to ensure that our customers get the trains and the service that they're paying for. So the trains and the CBTC system need to be communicating continuously throughout the entire corridor. They always have to be in constant communication. Unfortunately, to date, not all the trains are fully outfitted with this capability. We have 2 that don't have the computer modules that I'm about to show you. And but once they are outfitted, obviously the trains go through the extensive trial running that I've talked about in the past, and we need to demonstrate the full capabilities, communicating end-to-end along the corridor. Now, this last point is important. The city requires all our vehicles to be fully tested and commissioned to ensure service can be provided to the level prescribed in the project agreement. That number of 34 is not a city number. The way this P3 worked is you provided the private sector the service level that we needed to move 10,700 passengers per hour per direction. You've heard me use that number over and over again. That is your morning rush hour on your current BRT. and there's always full capability to expand in the future. Proponents needed to come back and demonstrate to the city, based on those outcome service levels, how many vehicles they needed. So this is an RTG number. And the way the math works is the following, and I'll talk about double consists in a moment. We need 30 vehicles for the morning rush hour. So vehicle 1 to 30 is what we need to maintain our service levels in the morning. 31 and 32 is what is called a hot spare train. It's always on standby in the event that a vehicle goes down and you have a spare, no different than a fleet bus service. And then 33 and 34 are their maintenance spares that RTG has said, in order to keep your fleet of 30 going all the time, we need the hot spare and we need the maintenance spare. So it is their number, and we've been clear that we need all 34 vehicles. This is an example of some of the control systems in the train, highly sophisticated, a lot of elements to it, and each train has these components. Now, the testing and the commissioning of the trains, in terms of the status there, we're able to move in that full automated mode between Blair and New Ottawa, so that's our test loop. We've been doing those tests. Along the western corridor, so Tunney's to Pimsey, the trains are electrified, and there's some testing underway there. You may have seen those movements. CBTC testing in the west has also commenced, and there have been some train movements in the tunnel. Now, the full CBTC testing of those trains in the tunnel is scheduled to start in the next few weeks. When we're in service, so in the morning rush hour, afternoon rush hour, throughout the day, throughout the week, you will see a two-car configuration. So those 30 vehicles translate into 15 trains in full service. And we need to see the testing of the double trains coupled. That has started in the East End, as you know. There's been some photos out on Twitter and so forth. But we need to see that along the entire rail corridor from Tunney's to Blair. And to date, that has not commenced. Next, I want to move to revenue service availability. And you remember last fall there was a lot of discussion about this, and I just want to bring us back to what revenue service availability means and how it's defined. It's very important to emphasize revenue service availability is defined in the contract that you have signed with RTG. It's written, it's in black and white, it's a term that they agreed to in the contract. And no different than moving into a new house, the position the city took, which RTG agreed to, is there can only be minor deficiencies when we move into revenue service. So that's substantial completion of all the civil work, the mechanical and the electrical systems, delivery of all vehicles, in this case the 34 that they said they needed to ensure they meet our service standards, all the customer-facing elements, the signage, the next train announcements, the wayfinding and so forth, and commissioning and overall system performance and verification. You'll recall I've been talking extensively about system-wide integration. That is part of the revenue service availability definition that's in the contract. Maintenance readiness, so RTG, you'll recall, morphs into RTM, Rideau Transit Maintenance Group. They need to demonstrate to us that they're ready for maintenance, and they've done a very good job in that regard. Operational readiness, are they ready as an organization to support the system? Safety and system assurance, we've talked about that extensively. And then there's sign-off by the safety auditor. It is not the city safety auditor, it's the safety auditor that's been appointed to the project. Then there is the independent certifier, which is also required to issue a certificate acknowledging revenue service availability has been achieved. So there's a lot of steps to achieving RSA, and it's enshrined in the contract. Also, under the terms of the RSA, you've heard me use the term trial running, and I want to share with you the details associated with that that's contained in the contract. The objective of trial running is to demonstrate that the complete integrated system works. End-to-end, all subsystems, all personnel are there, the procedures are in place, so we can confirm we can go into revenue service. And Project Co, in this case, RTG, is required to conduct 12 days of continuous near-perfection running to demonstrate that ability to us. It's 12 days of near perfection. They can have some minor deviations, but we want to see that those double trains are running end-to-end stopping the right location, opening, announcing the next stops, everything's working, SCADA's up and running, we can do what-if scenarios, all those things. And at the end of the exercise, the integrated system is ready for revenue service. Now this bullet on the top of page 30 is important because it relates back to when I talked to you about the schedules. Remember the preloaded schedules that go into the computer? We need to see that we can move the passenger volumes in those regular and both for peak and non-peak schedules. That's the importance of the trial running. And the train cannot move into service from Tunney's to Blair. It only moves into service from Tunney's to Blair once there's full testing, commissioning, and trial running is complete. The safety auditor signs off, and then we're ready for revenue service. So the key activities that we need to carefully monitor and continuously push RTG on is the Redo station, multiple trains operating in CBTC mode, the western alignment and how things are going there vis-a-vis the vehicles, the end-to-end testing of Tunney's to Blair with double consists, verification of all the systems, the fire alarms, the next stop announcements, all those things, safety assurance, SCADA. SCADA is very, very important. It feeds into the control center all of the system elements so that in our control center over at Saint-Laurent we know what's occurring throughout the entire corridor. And full fleet operational testing in CBTC mode from Blair's to Tunney's. And then, of course, once the stations are completed, final inspections, code compliance, fire inspections, and so forth. So let's talk about where RTG is on the November 2nd date that they provided to us on February 5th. You recall on February 5th, they advised the city that it would achieve RSA by November 2nd. And we have been meeting with them constantly and being on top of them in terms of how are they going to achieve that, when are they going to achieve it, and so forth. Last week, RTG met with the city and they requested that the city carve out certain requirements of that RSA list that I just walked you through. So they asked us to eliminate some of those requirements, and they asked for an amendment to the project agreement because they believe they cannot achieve RSA by November 2nd without the city deviating from contractually what we agreed to with RTG for $2.1 billion. And it's important to note that you are not required to waive any of the requirements of the RSA. You're under no obligation, and we have repeatedly advised RTG that it must meet all of its contractual requirements. So what RTG requested in the carving out exercise is a modification to the fleet size, a partial station opening of Redo, and reducing the requirements of the prescribed trial running, the 12 days of consecutive testing from the project agreement. They also asked us to consider partial line openings and soft starts. Some important factors in our decision making in this regard. Number one, you've heard me say over and over again, this is a conversion of the busiest BRT in North America to light rail. On opening day, it'll be the busiest light rail system in North America. Unlike new LRT lines or line extensions, our line is required to handle the very significant passenger loads that are currently using our BRT. And the trial running requirements, which is, as I've said repeatedly, is the demonstration of the ability of the system to run and function the way it was designed from end to end, reliably handling our passenger loads at the headways and the travel times, and those are all important things that were included in RTG's bid. So our position is the following. We reviewed, we listened attentively, we assessed, we continued to bring our extensive team of experts to the table, and what they proposed last week we have rejected based on the following. We have been clear with RTG consistently that a modified fleet size will put the city at risk and will put us at risk in our ability to operate the system as planned and promised to our customers. At the end of the day, you're building a light rail system for the customers, and they need to get what they were promised. We also said we are not on for the dilution of the prescribed trial running requirements. It's clearly outlined in the PA, and they've been contractually agreed to by RTG, and it degrades our ability to be assured that the system will operate as designed, a risk we're not prepared to take. With respect to any partial station opening, we are clear. We know how our system works. It will impact transfer points, the multimodal linkages that you've asked for. It introduces confusion to our customers. They have enough change that we need to navigate them through. Mobility, access, egress, where are the escalators, where are the elevators. And you know, what's very important for us, for our customers and for our taxpayers, is that important first impression. We do not want to degrade that. RTG has been contracted to design, build, test, and commission the entire system. That is their obligation, and they're obligated to complete all those tasks, and we've been firm in our position that we will hold them accountable to its contractual obligation. What they've put forward transfers the risk to us, to the city, to our taxpayers, and to our customers on many fronts, operationally, reputationally, and could potentially lead to additional costs. And with respect to the oversight, I can assure you that we have had extensive and rigorous oversight by a comprehensive team of experts, including rail, vehicles, railroad control systems, project controls, SCADA, and so forth. Mr. Cripps has assembled a team of experts from day one, and we've been overseeing every single element of the build and their schedules. In addition to those resources, we brought in an independent expert panel from across North America of CEOs, designers, constructors, and people that have operated these systems to ask us to assess the schedule and to conduct independent assessments throughout the project relating to revenue service availability. So you recall when RTG kept saying, you know, we can make November, we can make May, we can make May, and we called them out. It's through this oversight that we've been able to do that. Now, on the way home last Friday, I got a call from RTG, and they notified us that they've submitted a schedule, not a change in RSA notice, but a schedule that they now plan to achieve revenue service availability by November 30th. The preliminary analysis, and we have to do a deep dive on that, of that information provided by them late Friday, shows that all vehicles and testing and commissioning would not be completed until the new year. That's our preliminary assessment of it. So despite that late Friday evening development and the request of last week, the assessment of when the city would be in a position to enter revenue service remains the same. If they do not achieve November 2nd, the liquidated damage fee of $1 million will be applied against the next payment to RTG. And based on the assessment by the city, its expert advisors, and the information that RTG just recently provided to us, the city is of the view that the LRT system will not enter revenue service in 2018, and the last independent assessment we conducted indicated Q1 2019. Now that's before we received the information late Friday. So, protecting our investments, we will continue to use every single tool at our disposal under the PA, including, I can assure you that all the remaining milestone payments continue to be deferred. We are recovering our costs under the project agreement, including mobility matter deductions, and the monthly service payments to RTM have not been paid out. And as part of the P3, the city has put in measures in place to protect the taxpayer. And these measures are part of the P3 AFP procurement model, which ensures taxpayers are protected, customers get the safe, convenient, and reliable world-class system they paid for, and RTG is responsible for the delivery of the system in accordance with the project agreement. So our priorities continue to be provide Ottawa with a safe, reliable, and world-class system, ensure that safety is the top priority, and protect the interests of the taxpayers, transit users, and all residents of Ottawa. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Happy to take any questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Manconi. Councillor Blais.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Manconi, for the presentation. Certainly, I think this... Sorry. I think this is very disappointing news, and I think probably a lot of people, I know I'm pretty angry actually right now. So I'm going to ask some questions, and I'm probably going to say some things. On On August 13th, we got a memo outlining progress of the project from Mr. Cripps, and certainly it indicated that we had to continue to focus on certain elements of the project, but there wasn't any red flags or, kind of big oh my gods in the memo. I read it a couple times very recently, and, it said be cautious, but there wasn't a, oh my, let's really be careful here. And so I'm wondering what changed from the 13th of August to last week or whenever it was when you found out this information.
That's a great question. So what changed is the city did its job, and we conducted an independent assessment, as we've been doing throughout the entire build. That was completed on Friday, August the 17th. We saw some things we did not like. We spoke to RTG, and last Tuesday they came forward and put forward the proposal that I'm talking to you about, where they carve out the RSA. RTG has continued to hold steady and firm and fast on they will make November 2nd, and we called them out. We did our due diligence and said, sorry, we are not seeing the evidence, and as I've said over and over to them, I was not waiting to November 1st to come and tell you any bad news. So we saw the first indication in end of August. We forced them to come in. They came in and presented information. We did not like that. And then last Tuesday, they came out with this proposal to carve out the RSA. And then Friday, on my way home, I think it was around 6 p.m., they then subsequently gave me the updated schedule.
And on the 17th of August, when you said we did the deep dive and learned that information, was that your group and Mr. Cripps and his team, or was this the third-party group that you've spoken about a few times?
Third-party independent assessment team. Yeah. Same team that's been reviewing the entire project. That's the team that helped me call out RTG when I raised the flag on May date. And so it was that team, and it's done concurrently with us and with RTG, by the way. We go out and we walk the entire line, we look at stations, and we ask them pointed questions.
So if we didn't have this third-party group, do you think RTG would have bothered to tell us?
I can't speculate that. You'd have to ask them that.
Okay. But the information, I think you said it was Friday night, just this past Friday, that they said they can deliver by November 30, and you don't agree with that, based on our current understanding of where they are.
So not to get into too many details, but I was driving and I said, what does November 30 give me? Yeah. Because I said, unless it's every single element of RSA, my story to Fedco is not changing. And so they said, well, no, we still have some vehicles that those missing components, and you can proceed without all the vehicles. And I said two things. Number one, it's not all about the vehicles. We still have Rideau Street. We have other things that the SCADA and so forth. And I was crystal clear in reiterating the point that the expectation of this council, this city, and the taxpayer and the customers is that they're going to meet every single element of RSA, that we are not deviating from that.
And so, I know you've been very consistent about that to this committee and to council, and I think council's been consistent back to you with that as well. I guess, where is the breakdown happening with RTG then? Like, why aren't they getting it?
Again, I can't speculate. I can tell you my opinion. I think they want me to flinch, and I'm not flinching. I'm not biting.
Okay. And so, can we still trust RTG when what they're telling us?
At the end of the day, you will have a world-class system. The work they are doing, there's no concern with work. I don't want people to start speculating, are they fast-tracking and safety and then compromising. The oversight that Mr. Cripps has, the oversight that we have through the certifier, the independent safety certifier, the safety assurance program, very robust build. I trust them with their build. I trust them with the vehicles. I trust them with all that. There's nothing that leads me to doubt them in any respect in that regard. You just have to go and visit the infrastructure and see it firsthand. And also those independent leaders that we brought here have operated things like New York City, Boston, and other systems, St. Louis. They've been around complex systems. They've not raised any flags to Mr. Cripps, to myself, and you have those layers of oversight embedded in the project agreement. So we can trust them on the build. I can't comment on what motivates them. I suspect it's commercial issues. You have to remember, you've got them right now in terms of you're not giving them the payments that they were looking for, and we are not deviating from that.
And so can you remind us, then, or maybe Mrs. Sinowik can remind us, when was the last time we paid RTG for their work?
Milestone 11, I believe, was paid, I think, somewhere around March. They achieved, as per the project agreement, when they achieve a milestone, we have to pay them. So that last one was paid earlier this year.
And how much money, should they actually deliver the system, how much money is still outstanding?
There's still 2 payments left, substantial completion and revenue service availability. And if memory serves me, it's around $275 million.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Manconi, you had said that, the civil work at the end was some of the easiest stuff and not to worry about that, et cetera. And, there's still some civil work to do, as I understand it. Is that work that can be done effectively during the colder winter months? Like, can concrete hold up if it's poured in the winter and so on and so forth?
Yes, I think the good news on that front is there's not much of that left to be done. All the major landscaping and so forth is done, so they're not into those things that are susceptible. They will have to heat their work areas for their employees if they need to do fit-ups in those above-ground stations, but those are tracking well. It's really Rideau is the one that they've got a lot of work to do, and all the concrete is done, and the logistics on Rideau for them is complicated because while we're doing active train testing, and this is where we grilled them, they need to move material in and out in between our train testing and so forth. So it's Rideau is the complicated one.
Okay. And how does this affect what happens next? How does this affect Stage 2?
So a few things. Stage 2, there's nothing that we know of that we see that will impact Stage 2. As you know, you've already ordered the vehicles. The MSF expansion is well underway. The procurement is continuing. There's no dependency on do we need to be in service to get our Stage 2 underway. So that is fine. And then what's very important too is the customers on the bus service. There's no more changes to our customers until we launch the train service. They've been through enough, and so there is no more bus changes coming to any of the routes throughout the system. And if I could throw that in, I remind RTG it's not just about their build. OC Transpo and the rail office have been going full out doing one thing, taking care of our customers and our employees, because they're going through the phenomenal change that this transformation brings, and it is highly complex. And on the city side, 21 projects for readiness, all on track. We're waiting for them.
Thank you. I'm glad you mentioned our customers because, I'm sure we've all heard from our customers, and let's remember our customers are our neighbors, about the impacts that we've seen. And it was always under the understanding that they were going to get this amazing new system, and they were going to get it in the spring, and then we asked for some patience, and they would get it in the fall. And now we're asking for even more patience, and I hope that the cup hasn't runneth over. And it's not just bus riders either. We have to remember that the road detours that have been in place for, in the case of Orleans, years to accommodate this. And in fairness, I know that there's no more route changes coming, but there are other changes that might come, I presume, before the train might open, given we don't know now. And so I would really, I would not support changing fares until LRT's open at this point. If you recall, we had changed the fare schedule to January 1 implementation. I'm not sure that I could support changing fares in this environment. And so, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to direct staff to review the fare options, including a delay in the implementation of the fare table, the new fare table, until LRT is ready to go. And I presume, and the clerk's office can correct me, I presume this is probably something that needs to be considered by the next council. So to have that information and a recommendation back to the next council at the earliest opportunity of the new council, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, and I would also add that staff identify a revenue stream.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's appropriate.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Blais. Just clarify, Mr. Manconi, because I don't think we dealt with it specifically with respect to the trains, because for many months on our green, yellow, and red progress chart, the train system, or the physical trains, tended to always be green, and there was a problem with parts that went missing, basically, and that slowed down the final component. Can you explain what happened?
Certainly. Well, if you look back at the presentations I've given you to date, train production was moving along very well. We tweeted out the 34th train build and so forth, and again, we were surprised. RTG a few weeks ago came in and said, we have a bit of an issue, and we asked what's the issue, and we were surprised to learn it's with the train build. They had parts that went missing, and it was a range of everything from the actual hard parts on the train. They were able to, Alstom was able to either remanufacture those parts or get suppliers to reroute components to them. What's missing right now are two critical computer systems that go into the computer modules that go into the last two trains. And they're provided by Thales, so they're in contract with OLRTC, so the city does not own that risk. We do not get into that space. You did a great job of giving the vehicle risk to the proponent. Otherwise, you'd be into a debate with Alstom right now. And they are trying to either get those parts manufactured or find them. And I'm a little dumbfounded as to how we can't get two extra computer modules. And I'm not telling you anything I haven't told them. That A, we're extremely disappointed, and B, get the parts.
On the financial risk, you mentioned the $1 million that will be deducted from their compensation. I also understand that we will hold back any of our incurred costs as a result of the delay. Is that correct?
That's correct. We, as you recall, we balanced the transit budget, so it's a net impact of zero, and that's through the holdbacks of the RTM maintenance period and also the continuation of the levies that they're charged for detours. That continues, and we're going to continue to do that, and the city manager has given us direction to, we're not sending them an invoice, we're deducting that from the milestone payments.
Great. Thank you. Councillor Aguilar, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So a couple of comments and questions. First of all, I have a lot of sympathy for the remarks made by Councillor Blais and the direction that he's given to review what we might be able to do for our customers. I fully support that. I think that's a discussion that we need to have, especially if, as you seem to suggest, Mr. Manconi, that we're not going to get service on November 30th. We're probably not going to get service until sometime in 2019. So that's a direction that I very much support, so we can have a full discussion around what we might be able to do. I think our bus riders, our transit users have been more than patient over the last number of years. And what we've held out for them is it's going to get better. You're going to have a better system, a safer system, a more efficient system, a cleaner system, all those things. And I do truly believe we are going to have that, but we're certainly not going to have it when we anticipated we were going to have it, and we're certainly not going to have it when they anticipated they were going to have it. So it's a good direction. I think we need to have that. We need to have that discussion to see what we can do to ease the transition and also to ease the bad news that we're providing. You had talked about the fact that you've balanced the OC Transpo budget, so we're at a sort of a sum zero for this. Will that's for this year. Does that carry into next year as well, Mr. Manconi? Are we able to provide the same level of bus service that we need to in the event that the train doesn't open till February or March or whatever that might be, and still still be at an even position in terms of dollars, or is your budget then going to go into a deficit?
So the balancing of the transit budget, you're quite right, Councillor, was for this year. We brought a report to Transit Commission in that regard. The work that we have to do based on last Tuesday and Friday evening's call now is go back and balance that again for whatever comes in the new year. But our position is we're going to continue to keep levying those charges off of the milestone payments.
Okay.
And we cannot change, and I'll use the word very carefully, degrade or impose more on our customers, and RTG knows that. So we're continuing with what we've got in terms of the service.
And just so I'm clear, the changes that have already been made, the additional transfers, even though you're putting a hold on further changes to the system, but changes that you've made this fall, for example, they're going to stay in place until the train goes into service?
They are, but we need a bit of breathing room because, again, there was a lot thrown at us last week. I need to go back and meet with the OC Transpo team, and I need to understand all this. But, yeah, the current plan is to hold it the way it is right now. We don't want to be flip-flopping back and forth. The point of any future changes is that's when all of the future transfers get infused, and obviously they can't be implemented until we go to launch.
Right, but I just think that adds more substance to the direction given, because there are some people out there that are making those transfers in anticipation of the train opening in November. And now we're saying that's not going to happen, but we're still going to expect you to make those transfers. And so your trip is going to be different than it used to be and not as good as we promised it was going to be. So, again, I think that adds to the direction request. You had said that you have an independent group that's looking at this and that you've met regularly with RTG. So then that begs the question for me, why didn't we know? If we were on top of them, as you said, if we were meeting with them regularly, is it a question that RTG is not telling us everything? Is it a question that we're not asking the right questions? Like, how do we get to this point if we're having these regular meetings, if we have these oversight bodies, as the experts from New York and Boston and everything else looking at the system and looking at the development, and yet we're finding out that it's not going to work on time. And we're finding out as I say, if you go back to the August memo, everything seemed to be mostly fine. No real red flags, and here we are less than a month later, and there's a lot of red flags. So how do we get there?
Well, I won't comment on what RTG is telling us and not telling us, because I can't speculate. It would be wrong for me to do that. I can tell you we have not been wrong to date. I think RTG would have hoped that you would have been sitting back in May waiting for that train to go. I think they're not used to a client that is as insistent as I am in the regard of we're not going to flinch and deviate. And I think if there's any part of the equation that perhaps gets lost in the optimism to get this thing built, is that we need to be perfect on day one. There isn't another comparator of this system where full loads transfer over on day one. So where in other builds they may have had clients that are prepared to do soft openings or one less entrance to a station and so forth, we can't, because you're transferring all those loads live on day one. And so does that get lost in them sometimes when they're looking at the commercial bottom line and so forth? I don't know. I can't speculate. But we wouldn't be here if we didn't have the independent assessment team and the oversight. We'd be waiting for November 2nd.
So we've got that in place now, and we're still find ourselves in certainly a situation we would prefer not to have been. What can you say to us today that you're taking steps to have additional safeguards so that we don't find out in the first quarter of next year that all of a sudden it's not going to happen until the summer? So what additional steps are you and your team taking to hold RTG's feet to the fire, to make sure we're asking the right questions, and more importantly, to make sure they're giving us complete and full answers?
So the first thing is the parts for those trains. They need to give us an answer on that one. We will then take their new schedule, with which when you start this massive build, it's pages and pages of data Now we're down to the critical 5-6 milestones that they need to build. And through the scheduling experts that we have, we look at can they achieve those dates and those builds, and that you're not tripping over on critical paths. How much float time do they have? How do they get there? So we'll be back in the room looking through all those elements and asking them those questions, and they have to give us the evidence on how they get to whatever date they're choosing to pick. I can tell you verbally on Friday, I told them unless all of the RSA elements are in there, November 30th doesn't mean anything to me.
So, and you've said that a couple of times, and I know you don't like to get pinned down to dates, and I understand that, but can you give us some sense of when you think the train will be in service with what you know now?
You're quite right. I will not give you a date. I'll say the same thing I said last time. I can't guarantee you a date because it's their date to manage. But what I will tell you is that we're going to hold their feet to the fire, and our hope is that we can launch this train in Q1 of 2019. That is the objective that we want to get to, knowing what we know now. But perhaps things change after today. You know, I'm sure they're going to be looking to us as to what we're saying to you today and what the response is, and it's non-negotiable. We need those trains and we need those parts found. So they may miraculously show up with parts, and things may shift. We want the train in service just as much as anybody else. We want the pressure point, the issues, the stress over on our customers and our staff. I have to go back and talk to union leaders and talk about the layoffs and so forth. There's a lot of things that we, the city, have to do as a result of this. And so the sooner the better, and it is our full force that we're going to hold their feet to the fire. And I know that the city manager continuously has had my back on this, and I can assure you that RTG is going to be hearing from both of us about next steps.
So, again, to go back to the concept of carving out pieces and doing it earlier and that sort of thing, to keep it in as simple terms as possible, if we take the train system with any of the RSA requirements outstanding, it would be a little bit like buying a piece of furniture at IKEA from the as-is department. You can't bring it back and say, I found another ding, another scratch. We're done. Is that a fair way to sum it up?
Here's my analogy on it. It's a great question. Assume you and your spouse want to build a house. You go to a builder. You say, I don't know anything about houses. Here's the size of my family. Here's what I want to do. Here are some of the amenities I want in that house. Come back and give me a price and a date as to when I can move into that house and it's fully complete. So they come back and they say, based on your family size, based on your amenities, you want an office and so forth, you want Wi-Fi, you want great appliances, we're going to build you a 4-bedroom house. And here's your move-in date. Move-in date arrives and they say, and you go in and you say, well, the 4th bedroom's not available. Well, don't worry about that. You don't need that 4th bedroom. Well, what about the power in the kitchen? It's not fully there, and some of those state-of-the-art appliances I wanted, and the Wi-Fi is not up and running. Just take that. You'll be fine. That's the analogy I bring to it. You ask for a 4-bedroom house, fully equipped, tested, commissioned, ready for you to move in, and you went to an expert because you didn't have expertise in building a home, and you knew you gave them your family size. In your case, it's the customer volume. They gave you the design. They gave you the price fixed. They gave you the testing and commissioning, and they said, when it's done, it's yours. The only thing you can come back and talk to us about is the odd scratch or the odd touch-up paint. And in this case, it's defined as minor deficiencies. Not a missing bedroom, not missing appliances, not Wi-Fi that's not working, and so forth. And we have had minor deficiency discussions with RTG, and we've been very fair, very reasonable, because we do have a great legal team that reminds us you got to be reasonable in these things.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Harder, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and as Councillor Egline knows, I wrote down a lot of questions, and fortunately a lot of them have been asked, so I'm not going to repeat that. But building on what you were talking about as far as the staff, because as we know, I know many of the drivers have been talking to me about, their notice and stuff like that. I mean, I'll be interested for that update, because I think that's critical, whether we're going to have people that are going to be available that haven't found something else to do and made a commitment, when they were anticipating leaving. But my concern on that as well is we haven't likely been investing in our fleet because we anticipated not needing as many of them. So from things, everything like winter tires to, and absolutely we need that with the fact that now we're not going to be finished really until we're likely into the deep of the winter. But my concern is, are we going to have the fleet to support the current system?
Yes, you do, I think it's people and the fleet. So on the people, we will work with the union leaders who have been very, very good with us, and we'll move that. And for those unfortunate employees that got a layoff notice, that date is going to change into the new year, and we may go month to month or something like that. We'll work with the union to sort that out. On the fleet, we were anticipating to get through the end of the year because we're in November, so it was November, December, and then we dispose of the fleet. We'll have to do some things with that, but I think it's all manageable. And again, those are all costs that we're going to track, and we're going to add it to the bottom line.
So we're going to anticipate that RTG will pay us for those extra unknowns, because you haven't budgeted for that kind of investment of that many buses that now we will need for the system.
So you're fine on the detour cost because it's an hourly all-in rate. I think some of the things that we need to do is we'll be very selective on, we're deferring some of the maintenance on those vehicles that were non-essential, a seat that's ripped and those types of things. So, but if there's anything that we need to do to continue beyond December 31st, we'll certainly track all that.
Thanks. And I'm also, I know that Councillor Blais brought up the Stage 2 and whether there be a delay or not, but I think that is fundamental to the success of LRT in our city. We've been, west of Tunney's, we've been hanging on with bated breath where people are excited now about coming out to Barrhaven, going out to Canada. And it's critical. So do we have the ability to stay on schedule with that? I mean, and are you concerned that we actually have a deal or our contract is actually with RTG to be the manager of the next stage? Do you have confidence in that? And if necessary, can you reverse the order of the start? So, for example, you could start the work at Baseline where we already have a tunnel underneath the station to go that way if that needed to be. I mean, at this point, I don't think that we really know for sure a lot of things. I just want to make sure that stays on track.
Councillor, you're fine on Stage 2. There's no direct dependency that's going to compromise your timelines or your issues there. And on the confidence of RTG, I think this helps bolster our position as to what we want for Stage 2 in terms of perhaps they need to bring in some different approaches and personnel. I can tell you they're getting used to our style as a city in terms of we want what we're paying for.
Well, one thing that certainly I'm finding out with the work that I'm doing on AVEN and precision agriculture and that sort of thing that's unique to us is our weather. Do you think that there's a chance that the extreme weather conditions that we have in Ottawa are a factor that maybe no organization that has built this sort of LRT of any kind, tunnels, etc., has had to deal with, and that is part of a learning curve as well? Do you think there's a possibility that that's tied in? Because I know for a fact that people are looking to Ottawa as a test base on the other things we're working on because we are unique in globally.
I don't think climate is the issue. I think we need to remind ourselves, and I'm not defending RTG, but I'm sympathetic to the following. They did have a massive sinkhole. And to their full credit, they did a phenomenal job of responding to the restoration of that. And it's an engineering marvel what they did there to get that tunnel reconstructed and the issues there. Again, I'm not speaking on their behalf. This is John Manconi observing. In hindsight, should they have taken some time to assess, could that have caused some of this delay? I don't know. But the weather, I think there's a bunch of offsets that gives them advantages, such as we've got a dedicated right-of-way, so they're working, unlike some of the builds in Toronto and so forth. They're not in mixed traffic. They're not shutting down businesses. They are detouring buses, but they've got a dedicated corridor, so that's much easier for laying track and catenary and so forth. So the weather, contractors are used to the weather, and Ellis Don is doing some of the major civil on the stations. They're used to cold weather climate pieces. So
thank you very much.
Okay. Councillor Deans.
Thank
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Manconi, for the presentation. And I mean, I share the disappointment of people around the table, but maybe I don't necessarily share the surprise as much, because I've been feeling for months, just listening to your monthly updates, the magnitude of the challenge that was facing RTG, and maybe it's just because of my experience with the Presto implementation, which I recognize is really small potatoes compared to implementing something like this. But when you have all those systems that need to work together and be integrated, it's complicated. It's very complex. And just watching the monthly updates, I had a strong feeling that this date was not a realistic date. In fact, I've been telling my constituents out on the doorstep that although I'm hopeful, I'm doubtful that we're going to meet that date. And I very much agree with your approach. We don't compromise safety. We don't compromise reliability of the service. Even if it takes longer, as disappointing as that is, this is a system that's going to be running in this city for many, many years to come, and it has to be done right, and it has to be safety first. And if it's going to take longer, unfortunately, maybe it's just the Presto thing in me, but if it's going to take longer, it's going to have to take longer, but it has to be done right. And so I agree with you. But what I see is the domino effect that this is going to have on the city and on the corporation and across like a lot of different lines. For example, we're waiting for the transportation master plan to see how traffic patterns changed with the train running. So now the train's delayed. Presumably the TMP will get a further delay as a result. We've changed bus routes as a result. Are we going to put them back in place until we know when this is going to be up and running? And we've given notices to our bus drivers, termination notices for, I think, the year end, right? December 31st?
December 1st, yeah.
December 1st. So presumably we're now going to have to ask our bus drivers to extend. How long are we going to extend them for?
Again, we need to look at the revised schedule. Certainly we need them for the end of the year, and then we'll make some arrangement if we can go month by month. But it's complex, right, because they do their booking, as you know, Councillor Deans, on work and so forth. So we have to work all that out with the union president.
Okay, and what about the route changes? What are we going to do about those?
So no more route changes. What we implemented in the fall schedule stays in place. The key message to customers is that the next route changes will be the transfer points to the main hubs once the LRT opens. So we're not going to impose any more changes to our customers on routes.
Okay, so just hold there for now. Because it's difficult for people that are using the system every day when, there's so much uncertainty, but unfortunately I think that's the reality that we're faced with now. I had been calling for a continuous audit through phase 1 of LRT, and I guess I'm left wondering now if we had been continuously auditing, if some of these issues would have shown up in that process earlier.
Well, you'll recall we did have an audit by Mr. Hughes, and it was it was all about this. It talked about operational readiness, and it is those systems and subsystems that he identified, and remember he defined it as a very good process. All those this goes right back to Councillor Blais's question, what were you doing to make sure that we knew about this? And all of the systems worked. We have the monitoring programs in place. We have the independent assessment team, all those things. And it has been audited by Mr. Hughes, and he was very pleased with all the systems so that you did not get to the day before November 2nd with a surprise on your hands. So the early indicating system worked. And I said in the past I was going to wait till the last minute. So here we are. As soon as we knew it, the week after, we're briefing you.
Okay. I'm just wondering about the financial arrangements with RTG. I know there's the $1 million payment, but there's also going to be additional costs to the corporation as a result of this. For example, paying the bus drivers longer. Whose cost is that? Is that ours or is it theirs?
That's what I talked about earlier on. The transit budget has been balanced based on they are paying for those costs through the various project agreement clauses. So that was for this year, and now we're going to remap it if it needs to go into the new year.
So they'll pay for that?
That is the direction that we have given Mr. Cripps and his team. That came right from the city manager, and you saw that when we brought the transit restated budget before you. The treasurer and I reworked all the numbers, and so it's made up of the deferred maintenance payments. I think it's around $4 million, plus all of the payments that they're obligated to pay for detours, not the bus detours, but the traffic detours. Those fund our bus detour costs. So we're continuing to deduct our costs off of their next milestone payments.
Okay, and then Councillor Blake's suggestion, which I agree with, to not change the fare table until such time as LRT is up and running, that comes with a cost, presumably, and whose cost would that be?
Well, I heard the mayor say come back with a funding source, so I'm going to work with the treasurer, and we'll give different options and scenarios on that.
But is that the city's cost as opposed to RTG's cost?
So if you're asking me my opinion, I would not see that being our cost. The question will be, can you flow that back to RTG? So I don't know if the treasurer wants to comment on that, but I'm assuming that's where, based on the comments around the table, the direction would be, would see if you can charge that back to RTG.
Is that what you want? Yeah.
Yeah, that would be the intent, my amendment.
Okay. Okay, so that would be something. I think what I would like to ask for is for the treasurer to prepare for members of council a financial implications document that would look where you would outline the payments that are being held back and the additional costs that the city is anticipating as a result of the delay, just so we can have that all in one place and we can have a better picture of the costs and the potential for recovery of those costs. Is that something that would be reasonable?
So the intention, certainly can put something together. I guess the only sticking point right now is it all depends on what our actual revenue service availability date is, because we've got two different dates right now, ours and theirs, and so we'll put something together. And when would you
together, like on their date, and then also the longer it goes on, you know, how that builds.
And when would you want that for, Councillor?
Whatever's reasonable. What would be reasonable?
Okay. We'll try to put something together as quickly as possible.
Thank you. Okay. And just on those parts, the parts that we don't have, how long have we known that those parts were back-ordered?
So they confirmed last week that they could not locate those parts. They indicated to us a few weeks ago, I'm going to say 3 maximum, I don't have the exact date in front, but it was weeks ago that they had an issue with the vehicles and that they were missing parts, but their position at the time to Mr. Cripps and I was they were confident they had a plan to either acquire the parts, find the parts, or defer other train orders and get the parts. So they left us waiting for a response, and then we basically pushed them on it. So they found everything but those computer modules that I talked about, the Talus computer modules.
Okay, and just one last question. I had heard, I always say the tunnel talks, but I had heard from just through the grapevine that there's an issue with the power source, and once there's a power outage, we're having difficulty getting the trains up and running again. Is that the case?
No, the power issue in the stations is, I believe, Mr. Cripps will correct me wrong, some of the stations were being fed from other transformers, so once there's a bridging of power, and Rideau Station is the final one to have full power, but as you can tell by the photos, there's electricity in that. There were some final connections that they needed to do, and I believe all the power now is 100% through all the underground stations.
Good, thank you. Those are all my questions.
Thank you, Councillor Deans. Councillor Cheryshenko, please.
Thank you. I'm just going to say no one could be more disappointed than me and members of council, but I think to be more accurate, no one could be more disappointed than the many people who have suffered through, endured, patiently put up with the many delays that have been caused throughout this construction period, and many thousands were looking forward to that. So naturally, we're all, I'd probably say all of Ottawa is disappointed today. That being said, though, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for two things. First is for being as candid as you are, because it would be no surprise to anyone today if I were to say we're in an election period, and there would be nothing more tempting than for you to delay this announcement, to somehow find a way so that all were so disappointed in November, after the election's over, no one had to go out on the hustings and talk about the delay, one more delay. But I think that would have been doing a disservice to everyone. I think it naturally would speak to your own integrity if you were to do that, and it would be just too tempting to us to, fluff that for a while, and then, as I said, those of us who were back in November say, "Oh, isn't that a shame? We didn't know." We do know, and I'd rather know, and I would rather that we all know, and we go out and talk about. Are we better to move forward honestly with this delay and ask the question, do we put safety and quality of service and opening the system that it's meant to be a couple of months later now than the compromise system that has been proposed to you by RTG, if I understand that. So the second thing I want to thank you for is not blinking. And I don't think we need a motion, but if I were to draft one today, it would say, don't blink. Because we're all counting on you and your team to hold RTG to what they are contracted to do. So I think that's absolutely critical. We expect nothing less. So thank you for doing that so far, and please continue. I have a couple of questions. Many of the key ones have been asked now. When you're 6th or 7th on the list, the good ones get asked. We saw some media coverage and the city's response on the issue of concrete, deficient concrete, back about a month ago, maybe a little more than that. Is there any concrete that still needs to be repaired, that continues to be deficient? Because that's not a minor deficiency, I think we can all agree.
No. So as part of the quality management system for the project, RTG is responsible for quality assurance, quality control, and then the city puts measures in place to ensure that they're meeting those requirements. So the non-conformances that you're referring to are anything that doesn't meet the specifications of the project agreement. So to close out those non-conformances, RTG is required to come up to assess the non-conformance and come up with an acceptable solution to it, or an acceptable closeout to it. So it might be testing the material, it might be rejecting and replacing the material, it could be treating the material in some way, but all of those have been closed out. So there's nothing out there today that needs to be actioned in terms of non-conforming concrete or any other material for that matter.
And was there concrete actually replaced, repoured, repaired as a result of the city's own findings and the inspections?
Yeah, there's been a variety of remediation measures. So in some cases, they may core it and actually test it to make sure it meets the requirements. There has been loads of concrete rejected, which is quite common in construction. I mean, it's not as precise as you might think it would be. So if a load of concrete sits in the truck too long, the load has been rejected. There has been some material replaced. So it's been a variety of things. But again, each one of those needs to be assessed on its sort of own merits, what the situation is, what the non-conformance is. There are times when RTG will bring in experts in that material. If it's concrete or some other material, they'll bring in experts to do a review of that and then come up with the appropriate remediation plan. And again, the city monitors and tracks all of those things to make sure they have been closed in a satisfactory manner.
So to restate it, you can just nod. There is no deficient concrete, nothing that causes any safety concerns that has yet to be replaced or
repaired? Yeah.
That's correct.
Yeah, corrected, thank you. So we really are then talking about minor deficiencies beyond the very major delays that you already brought to our attention. Minor deficiencies, is that really just kind of a code word for cosmetic in the end? A minor deficiency would never be operational or safety.
By definition in the project agreement, a minor deficiency is something that won't impede or impair the city's use or enjoyment of the element. So a cosmetic item could be one of those. But if it's some of the things Mr. Manconi's been talking about, vehicles, stations, those would potentially or would impact the city's use or enjoyment of the system. So it falls beyond the definition of minor deficiency.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So as much as I'd like the system to be perfect the day it opens, and even those scratches and blemishes that are cosmetic to have been repaired, that's something I might be willing to compromise on in a very small way, but absolutely not on the kinds of things that you identified, on the number of vehicles, on the number of bedrooms in the house, and whether there's Wi-Fi, to use your analogy, Mr. Manconi. So we entrust to you not blinking and holding to that, and of course keeping us up to date should anything change. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hughley, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I want to pick up on what some of my colleagues have been asking about for the missing parts. Is this, the computer modules, is this something that in the wrong hands, they could use that to access the system?
No, it's a module that goes in, and you'd have to have all the other elements of that schematic that I showed you to work.
So there's no security risk to these missing parts for the system?
No.
Okay, thank you. That's a good relief. I agree with my colleagues that when this system does start, I'd like it to be fully tested and make sure that we're not going to get into breakdowns and, shutting it down for weeks for service and trying to move everybody back to buses. I think we've asked so much of our residents to have patience while we get this system going that I really want that first date to be solid. And so I appreciate what I'm hearing from you today, that you are pushing back and standing firm on that position with people, because I can tell you, I've talked to a lot of residents. The majority by far are understanding that you're trying to get a world-class system running here, but there has been impacts to their trip. We're hearing about, 15, 20-minute longer commutes and a lot of disruption, especially in the winter. So going into another winter on those buses, I'm sure no one's looking forward to that. But I think you've given us a lot of information here today that the majority will understand that it's necessary to delay. So thank you for that. I hope we have a means to communicate that to the riders as well, to make sure that they know some of the fact that you're not going to make any more changes, and if we do this thing to hold off on the rate increase, I think that'll be some good news for people. So thank you for that. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Conseiller Monette, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, not surprising. Everyone is a bit frustrated about the news. I guess what I find surprising is you mentioned that there's no effect on Phase 2. When we're looking at moving forward with contract being awarded, design plans for Phase 2, with work possibly expanding to April, how can this not have an effect on the timeline for start and completion of Phase 2?
That's a great question, because your early works on Stage 2, you're not connecting to the live network at that point. You can start all your civil work and so forth, and there's no dependencies from Stage 1 to Stage 2. The vehicle builds for Stage 2, that order's already been given, and that's proceeding. The maintenance and storage facilities, so we can house all those vehicles, that's almost done. So there's no direct connection to being in service. When you get into the final testing and commissioning phase of Stage 1 and Stage 2, that's when your live connections become very, very important, and that's down the road, obviously.
Okay. A bit disappointed. You mentioned that the bus routes will not be changed, and that's good news that the bus routes will not be changed right now. However, you're not looking at going back to the changes that we made on Labor Day. A lot of residents have expressed that they have had to use more transfers. It's a longer route. It's a longer walk. We're going through winter time before we see the completion of Phase 1. A lot of these residents were quite happy with the service they were getting before and are not very happy with the changes that have been made. The changes were made due to start of November and preparing for November. Would it not be better to roll back those changes to, say, March, right before we're anticipating the startup of Phase 1?
It's a very good question. Route changes are one big, complicated algorithm that takes between 6 to 8 months to map out. Because we do run it through the commuter simulation to get all those run times. You have to take it through booking operations. You have to do your bus fleet count. You have to match up your operator count and so forth. So the issue is, and this is why the information from RTG is important, and this is why we're going to be relentless in reminding them that we've got operations we need to balance on our side. Imagine if I unpack the route changes only to be caught midway through and then have to repack them. So A, I won't have enough time to unpack the recent route changes, and then B, if they do make Q1, we will repack. So we're flip-flopping back and forth to our customers. So it's that balancing act. So, Councillor, I don't have an answer for you today, but the current position, based on what I know, is it would be bad to flip back either all of those route changes or some of them, based on what I know. I have to assess all of that. And I don't even know if I could do it in time by when to do that algorithm to get all those things done. So it's a very valid question. I understand the concern. I hear the complaints about those that got impacted, but I don't have an answer for you today on that one. The current position is, my recommendation is hold the line on where we are. Let's see where we're going, and we can assess then.
Okay, well, what I would suggest is that Transit relook at that, and I think you're ready to have that discussion. I don't think it would be too comprehensive to roll back, because you already had a process in place right up until Labor Day, which was just a week ago, where everybody was used to the routes and everything. It's just a matter of getting the information out to the public that we are going back out of convenience for the residents during the winter months, and we will institute these changes that we had, as an example, on 38, closer to the startup. Anyways, that's a suggestion. I don't sit on Transit, but I hope that discussion is had. One more question is, what type of penalty will be charged to them for being late a second time?
So if they don't make the November 2nd date, the $1 million penalty gets deducted from their next, it's a liquidated damages payment. And then, of course, they are not getting all of those multi-million-dollar payments, so their bottom line is being impacted. They obviously have to go get funding sources from their short-term lenders at higher interest costs, so there is a direct cost to them in terms of their, obviously, eroding into their profit margins or losses or whatever. We don't have eyes into their books, but that is the other impact to them also. And I would also say reputationally, I can sense the tension in the room, and they've heard my frustration on where they are.
I do have one final one. We mentioned about the schedules of drivers being let go and so on. Have you had discussions with the union, or is it too early in that phase to have that discussion with the union to say, listen, we will need the drivers for an extra 4 months, and what does that entail for moving forward that way?
I have the 3 union presidents on standby because I told them I would be calling them after FEDCO. They're learning about this information through this forum. I always inform council first. We will use our positive labor relations that we have with those union presidents, and I am concerned about staff. They've been working very, very hard, so we need to take care of them also.
Yeah. It's the reason I ask is, a lot of these drivers had a date, a final completion date sort of thing. I'm sure some of them had found alternate employment. I'm sure some of them had looked at alternate plans. Do we have any plans in place if, say half of them say, no, I've already made plans, so everything to move forward?
I think the ones that were going to leave would have left by now, and we're not seeing a mass exodus. Remember, and we've met with every single one of them, the 320, whatever that number is. We gave them a piece of paper when they joined over 2 years ago saying you might be let go. Yeah. While this is frustrating and change, the positive to them is you're sticking around for a bit. And we're giving them support. We've got all kinds of infrastructure in place to help them out, including looking at alternative employments. We've other agencies that have said when they're done, ship them over and so forth.
But you do stand by people that you can, if there are people that leave, that you can replace them with?
We are continually hiring and training so that we have the pool of resources that we need to do cover off, yes.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Councillor Taylor, please.
Thanks very much, Mr. Mayor. And a lot of the questions that I had have been answered, asked by my colleagues, so appreciate that. John, I feel for you. You have a reputation for being a capable and competent manager with a track record for getting things done. And I think you have lived up to that, and you're still living up to that today. I think the one thing we probably left out of that contract was the requirement to have RTG come and sit here in front of us as well as you. But I understand that you're the person responsible ultimately for the project. So, we heard some of my colleagues, Councillor Chernyshenko, talked about, you didn't kind of shirk your requirement to come here and tell us about this, notwithstanding that it wasn't going to be pleasant news. So I wanted to ask you about your impression about that good faith. I think we have it with your team. My question is, does it extend to RTG? There comes a point where you start to feel like they're the kid who shows up the night before to tell you, I was assigned a project 2 weeks ago and I didn't do it, and now I'm in a bind. So, I'm concerned or I'm interested in what your opinion is about how this delay, again, the missing parts that disappeared out of the blue, how does this impact your view of the good faith relationship that we have with RTG? Because I think it's important because, I don't want to get to a scenario where we go operational. They're responsible for, maintenance and all the other products down the line, and the relationship is eroded to the point where they say, well, look, that's not written in the contract. That wasn't in black and white. So if we don't have to do it, we're not going to do it. So can you speak about that a little bit?
Certainly, and that is a very good point. We have a 30-year relationship with this organization. They transformed themselves to RTM. I can guarantee you that the relationships are professional, courteous. Am I frustrated at some of the elements? Yes. I think they're doing what commercially based organizations typically do. They're looking as to whether or not there's any latitude on the client. They're not surprised by what I'm telling you today. I spoke to their CEO into Friday, Saturday, and I told them, I just want to make sure, is there anything I've got wrong here? So there's no, after today it won't be, oh, no, that's not exactly what we meant. I literally walked them through, this is what you're proposing and this is our position. We have very good relationships. Mr. Cripps and his team have a phenomenal relationship with them. Mr. Kanalakis does, myself, and with the RTM organization, there's a general manager there. They are very good people. We get together and talk about this stuff collectively. So I'm not worried about the relationship eroding. We have a good project agreement that gives all the tools on both sides to have the difficult discussions and the processes to be followed when there is a disagreement.
Okay. So a couple of my colleagues, and no surprise, I'm a stage 2 counselor, not a stage 1 counselor, and I was always of the opinion that the second mouse gets the cheese, and there was always going to be difficulties with stage 1. The project of this size, it was unavoidable. You just get into a game of, how do you minimize them? You've said there's no impact to stage 2. There's no, until we get to that connectivity point with stage 1, which is down the pipe, there's no delay in the planning and the moving forward on stage 2. My question would be, how do your experiences on stage 1 to date, how do they inform, what we might want to embed in our agreement with respect to stage 2? What are the things that we didn't anticipate that, looking back on it now, we want to ensure that we have in our stage 2 operability agreement?
So we did a lessons learned on stage 1, and we've amended stage 2 accordingly. We also have an ongoing roster of things that we're learning from stage 1 that Mr. Cripps and myself give to Mr. Swale, and that's been embedded in all of the procurement documents. The other thing that we have to our advantage is there's prescriptive language as to who they can assign to lead these projects. And when we get to that point about the successful proponent and who they plan to put onto these projects, I think we have the learnings from stage 1 and stage 2 that we can apply in terms of the types of resources at the senior level and at the project management level of whoever the consortium is. So lots of learnings, and they don't stop. It's not just at one time. We've learned a lot from stage 1, and we're passing that on to the stage 2 team. And then the follow-up action from last week and this weekend, Mr. Cripps and Mr. Swale are going to get together as part of the review as to where we are on all these things.
Okay. With respect to the route changes, and I know Councillor Manette just went through that with you, and I'm a councillor who's had some route changes in my ward, and I've heard from my constituents that for some of them, while it was a great change and it works well for them, there's a set of them whom it doesn't work well, and it's introducing new transfers, and the ability to say to them, well, look, it's eventually it was going to hook you up with the train, and make for new options for you, was the only silver lining that we had. To your comment to Councillor Manette about, well, it's a complex system to introduce route changes, and it's not easy to walk back. I think that's some of the impacts that we've spoken about around this table are exactly that. We can codify in an agreement what's the penalty you pay, what's the if you don't deliver this, what do we do? Part of the challenge, though, is there's a reputational risk to the point where the ripples in the pond just get further out than you ever thought they would. So, at some point, it affects ridership levels, right? If you can't deliver the service and you're constantly moving the milestones, at some point we didn't predict that we would have this much of an effect on X, right? So, if we can't walk back. I guess what I'm saying is if we can't walk back something like a route change easily, then there are thresholds that we can be forced to cross based on the timeline that RTG gives us that we can't walk back. And there are going to be impacts. Maybe they're not financial, or at least not immediately financial, but they could be reputational. So, I would urge that we somehow look at embedding that in the future, stage 2 and beyond deliberations, because there's always going to be an impact, and if we put ourselves in a position where we can't reverse something because it's just too complex to do, then we have given up that lever to them, notwithstanding what's in the contract. So I'll leave that with you. My final comment, I guess, would be...
Sorry, Councillor, you'll have to get back on the list.
Okay, thank you. I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Councillor McKenney, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Manconi, for the update today. Again, I echo what Councillor Dean said earlier, and some of my other colleagues, that a delay in a project of this magnitude of 6 months and now another few months may not be surprising, and we can certainly look, to lessons learned and understand how we can perhaps get certainly better information and more timely information out of RTG in the future, because I don't see that that's happened to date. But what I do want to pick up on are transit riders, and in particular those transit riders who count on our transit system, our buses, to move about, not just to get into work and back every day, but those who have no other option but to ride our transit, our local transit routes. Many of those are seniors, many of those are folks with disabilities, many parents with children who have no other option but to take our buses every day. That's how they get to do their shopping, to do their groceries. It's how they go to our libraries. It's how they get around the city. And I'm going to, when we talk about the route changes, I wasn't supportive of the changes that happened at Labor Day, but it was going to be for 2 months, and it was going to be through a period, time, fall, which is probably the easiest time for people to be outside and walking. But now we're looking at likely February. We're looking at the winter. And specifically, the number 11 route. And I'm not going to go out and tell people, it's all about algorithms, so I realize you can't get from Confederation Station anymore to Rideau Centre. I'm not going to tell people that the algorithms are too difficult and we don't know how to walk it back, because we do. It's the same route. We're asking for the same route that was in place before Labor Day. So I'm appealing to you today. I'm going to ask you, I had the conversation with Councillor Leeper as well. Our residents are very much affected by that route change. It's not just a simple transfer. It means that there is a walk that is not accessible to people. There are many people. I can do it. I can jump off a bus at Confederation Station, go down that hill, slip and slide a little bit, go under the tunnel, get back out, scoot across the street, dodge traffic. But many people can't, and I have the option not to do it when I don't want to, or when the weather doesn't allow. So I am going to ask you to go back and look at the route, especially the 11. There is no other option for people. The folks taking the 11 are not civil servants coming in to the downtown, earning a decent living and going back out. These are folks that need their local transit. They need to be able to get to do their day-to-day living, and they don't have other options. So I will ask that you reconsider those changes and walk them back. I think that we're looking out several months. We're not asking for you to reconsider for 3 weeks. We're asking you to reconsider for what is likely another several months.
No, Councillor, I've heard you all loud and clear, and maybe I wasn't clear in my response to Councillor Minette, so I'll clarify it. I got all this news last week. I'm going to mobilize our team. I need to know from RTG what's the date we're working to your point, if it's 3 weeks, 2 weeks, whatever or if it's months. I'm going to mobilize Pat and his planning team, and I want to go route by route on those last changes, which are the ones that are causing us difficulty. I've seen the emails. I know where they are. And can we walk them back? And if so, how do we do that, and can we do that? I just don't want to say yes today without knowing all the inputs from RTG and whether or not I can and by when. So I totally get what you've just said. We've got to take care of the customer. We've got to take care of our staff that are driving those routes. So I want to think through that and manage those expectations well. And we will circle back with the affected councillors before we do anything in that regard, obviously. And then we have to tie it into the Master Ready for Rail campaign, because we've got to package up the messaging on all this to say, what are we telling our customers? What are we telling them about no more route changes? What are we telling them if we are walking back certain routes, and so forth? So you have my assurance. I will do a deep dive onto those things and look at it, because I understand the sensitivity associated with that and the lack of value proposition to those customers.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and I appreciate that it's been brought up several times today. So I just want to emphasize, timing, because, we have told the residents that, November 2nd is coming. So again, when we're back, when we're getting the phone calls, when we're talking to folks, when we're on the bus with them, we need to be able to give them some assurance that we will have answers. So I just want to leave that out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McKenney. Councillor Egli, second round.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick follow-up question to legal. So we've been given 2 dates so far. Neither one has panned out, unfortunately. If a third date is agreed to by the city with RTG and that also does not pan out, am I correct in understanding that in addition to holding back the money we would owe them, there would be yet another $1 million penalty to RTG for every date missed that we agreed to?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, if a date is agreed to by the parties, it would be another $1 million hold.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Okay, thank you. Anything else? Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Manconi and your team. Notice of the motion for consideration at subsequent meeting. Inquiries, no written inquiries received. Other business, adjournment. Carried. Our next meeting is the 2nd of October. La prochaine réunion, c'est le 2 octobre 2018. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.